Thank you for coming also, Richard. It's nice to see you in the meeting.
Sure, thank you.
There he is. Thank you for coming also, Richard. Nice to see you in the meeting.
Sure, thank you.
Hello, can you hear me? I can't hear you. I think I have removed my sound.
Alice, I heard you.
Now I can hear you. So, Bill, you are co-host now. You can start whenever you want. I will stop my screen sharing then. Is that?
To allow me to screen share.
Yes.
Okay. Welcome to our side event on building a sustainable. Okay, where did the Zoom phone? Okay, it's saying only the host and co-host can see the video. Is that
Oh, that's strange.
okay? Let me give it a try.
Maybe I have to stop the focus mode. Let me see. Yes, I think that should be possible now.
Okay.
No?
Okay, let me, one more try.
Now I can see, yes.
Okay. There we go. Okay, let me just say a few words before we begin. Go back to the meeting. I'll stop the share and go back to that in a second. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to our side event and apologize for our technical issues that we've had a little bit here in the beginning. Hopefully we'll make up for that in that we have decided to pre-record the first part of the meeting, so to avoid technical issues, but we see that hasn't necessarily helped us that much. So some of this is going to be repeated here when I start the video in a minute, but I just want to say up front, what is the process? First of all, we know that this side event session is about presenting a plan to have significant impact on allowing the entire population of the world to live in more harmony with nature and to better enable the world to address the problems related to the SDGs. So we're going to get into that in a detail. We'll get a detailed description of the plan from several people from various parts of the world who are familiar with the plan or are familiar with the impact this kind of a plan would have on the regions of the world that they're familiar with. So we are about to start here, and let me just check again. Yeah. Okay. So I have to go back here, and I'm going to share my screen now, and we will start the video. When the video is done, the video lasts about 25 minutes. And unfortunately, one of our speakers was unable to complete the video part in time. So it's going to take about 25 minutes. And at the end of the 25 minutes, we will go into discussion mode to answer any questions that any of you might have as to how this plan might work. So with that, you want to start the recording, Alice? Alice, do you want to? Okay. Welcome to our side event on building a sustainable economy by empowering people worldwide. The UN Secretary General has stressed repeatedly that the world is tremendously off track to effectively address the major problems facing the world in time to avoid severe, potentially existential consequences of failing to do so. Today's side event will introduce a potential solution aimed at creating a sustainable global economy that would greatly expand the share of the world population able to participate equitably in that economy, while encouraging its migration to one based more on sustainable products and services, while at the same time supporting the achievement of most of the SDGs worldwide. This plan is called a Supplementary Income for All, or simply the SIFA plan. Hi, I'm Bill Graham, and I'll be your moderator for today's side event, which is sponsored by the Institute for Planetary Synthesis and the Commons Cluster of the United Nations NGO Major Group. Today's session will begin with an introduction to the SIFA plan by a panel from different parts of the world. The introduction segment has been pre-recorded and can be seen on YouTube at the address shown on your screen. Following the introduction to the plan, the panelists will be happy to answer any questions you might have. We are eager to hear your thoughts. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Lasinka Ulatowska. Dr. Ulatowska has been associated with the UN for 53 years, and she personally knew Peter Koistra, the founder of the SIFA plan, then known as the World Marshall Plan, and has published a book about the plan. Dr. Amos Obi. Dr. Obi is a Nigerian innovator and the strategic director of the Head of Ed Skills Academy Networks, which specializes in preparing large numbers of young people to work in the field of sustainable development. Dr. Joseph Chevelle. Dr. Chevelle is the president of the Galilee Institute. I'm sorry here, just 1 second here. I just have to stop the share here. You can see saying I have low system resources. 1 second, please, and I'll try to pick up where I left off. One second. Institute for Planetary Synthesis and the are eager to hear your thoughts. At this point, I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Lasinka Ulatowska. Dr. Ulatowska has been associated with the UN for 53 years, and she personally knew Peter Koistra, the founder of the SIFA plan, then known as the World Marshall Plan, and has published a book about the plan. Dr. Amos Obi. Dr. Obi is a Nigerian innovator and the strategic director of the Head of Ed Skills Academy Networks, which specializes in preparing large numbers of young people to work in the field of sustainable development. Ms. Yvonne Berry Walker, Chief UN Representative of the All Win Network, NGO, which is dedicated to helping all people worldwide have a greater role in shaping their own future. It's now time to hear from our panelists regarding the SIFA plan. Dr. Ulatowska, you've known about the plan for a supplementary income for all and a sustainable economy for the earth, the SIFA plan for short, for some 40 years. In fact, you personally knew its developer, Peter Koistra. Could you give us a quick overview as to what the plan is all about?
Thank you. The Plan for a Supplementary Income for All and a Sustainable Economy for the Earth, the SIFA plan, aims at achieving a sustainable global economy while enabling all to participate and leaving no one behind. The SIFA plan consists of 3 aspects which are closely related to sustainable development. They are, number 1, a supplementary income for each woman, man, and child that they're encouraged to spend on what's important to their individual lives, but without harming nature. This aspect directly promotes the achievements of SDGs 4 and 5. It also encourages all to live in harmony with nature. Number 2, a supplementary global economy for sustainable products and services. that would be available on a separate electronic marketplace. The economy is another of the 3 dimensions of sustainable development which support the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. This promotes SDGs 14 and 15 directly and also promotes the achievement of the whole economic aspect of the SDGs. 3, annual global community-driven decision-making to establish which products and services will be made available to the supplementary economy. Although this relates most specifically to SDG 17 partnerships, it also promotes the whole social dimension, which is the 3rd dimension of sustainable development. By promoting the 3 dimensions of sustainable development, the environment, the economy, and society, the CIFA plan promotes the achievement of all of the SDGs simultaneously. It involves all people in promoting the sustainable economy and thus gives a strong impetus to the whole of the 2030 agenda and possibly helping to do away with the shortfall mentioned by the UN Secretary General.
Thank you. Dr. Amos, through your extensive travels, you're familiar with the effects the CIFA plan would have on people from diverse backgrounds. Please describe the effect you anticipate such a supplementary income would have on people in poor parts of the world.
Thank you. Talking about the implementation of the supplementary income for all, definitely this is going to do magic in terms of transforming the world. Can you just imagine poor families around the world that hardly earn 500 USD annually, if they are given extra $500 to be spent on nature-based organic products or digital services that can improve their livelihood in terms of extra income and wealth creation. Such family could use such an extra money to invest in food production, in education. You can imagine even children from such homes could even use such extra amount to transform their education by acquiring the necessary shoes, clothes, and educational materials.
Is the CIFA plan only for individuals?
Again, individuals giving this income could use it up to 50% on services, sustainable services that will enhance the community life. Such services like internet facilities, acquiring better things like sporting activities could help improve such families' life. Not only that, I imagine places like northeastern Nigeria, around the Mambila Plateau, and they go in around Niger Delta, area regions of Nigeria, where you see women trekking for miles, looking for good water and means of livelihood. It's such amount to free their time and make a better use of their time and resources, because it will help them to acquire the basic things that are needed for livelihood.
So business itself would also be affected?
Yes, definitely. It will improve much on businesses. For instance, our organization, the Head of our Skill Academy for Innovation, where we train young people in Nigeria and in Africa on sustainable development skills. It will have much impact because such people will now have what we call a fund to establish small-scale businesses after the training in the area of green and digital enterprises, which can fast-track the achievement of the SDG. At the same time, the whole new global market is now being created through the SFR implementation, where people will have to deal with products and services that are nature-based and environmental friendly. And that will go a long way in improving or eradicating the serious problem of climate change, which is a major problem affecting the world today. The adverts will lead to people being informed on what is good for them and the environment. So this is going to be a global form of education that will educate people on nature-based and how to work with nature in harmony and do their business that will improve and fast-track the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Existing businesses will also have to be affected, and they will definitely have to shift their way of operation in line with this new trend. For those who have some means of livelihood, definitely 500 USD may not mean much to them, but however, through their involvement in the global market space for sustainable products and services, they will be able to expose, advertise their product, which could also improve their businesses. Such people also can still develop their personal skills in the area of education and other social services, which can lead to global economic improvement. Economy on material goods and services that don't harm the environment will now be the focus, which will definitely lead to a sustainable world, which is in line with the 2030 global agenda. So, in summary, the SAFER plan is a way of financial inclusion for all that could bridge the gap by not leaving anyone behind, and by so doing, fast-tracking the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goal for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Amos. Lasinka, you were in touch with the UN Secretariat's Division on Development Financing regarding this plan. Could you please describe how such a plan could be financed?
Currency has always been a way to facilitate trade in diverse goods and services. In the past, currency was created depending on how much gold a country had. Now, currency is created according to how many marketable goods and services a country has. The more accurately a country's currency reflects what is being bought and sold, the harder and more stable the currency. While the SAFER plan is being set up, and at the beginning of each fiscal year of the SAFER plan, global experts on financing make an estimate of how many extra goods and services would be traded if all people worldwide were connected to the global electronic marketplace for sustainable goods and services. In other words, how much extra currency can be created to facilitate this trade. The currency that's been generated is divided in three ways. The first part would go to a fund that would be used to correct, as necessary, any inaccuracy with regard to the expert's original estimation, and also to correct any inflation or deflation that occurs throughout the year. A second part would go to the costs of setting up and running the SAFER administrative agency, and the remainder would be divided equally among all people worldwide. What's not used in a given year is simply deleted to prevent inflation. We chose the amount of approximately $500 a year per person as a way of illustrating how the plan would work. At the outset of the plan and at the beginning of each SAFER plan financial year, new calculations would have to be made.
Thank you, Lasinka. Now, as to the third aspect of the plan, Yvonne, who determines what products and services qualify to be in the sustainable marketplace?
The idea is to involve as many people as possible in making these decisions. The UN has a great deal of experience in soliciting views from civil society worldwide. In 2013, before a global consultation started on what were to become the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN held 11 global consultations. In terms of the SAFER plan, individuals and communities would be supported in the decision-making process. Individuals would make their choices without outside pressure. The decisions could be made at different levels, starting at the local level, then the regional, the national, and then the global level. Koister, the developer of the World Marshall Plan, estimated that for a world population of 10 million, it would take about 10 levels of decision-making from local to global levels. This program would require educational component, which would inform people as to which goods and services can be considered sustainable and why. In this way, the decision-making process embraces as many people as possible and includes an educational process regarding sustainable goods and services.
Thank you, Joseph. I can imagine that it would take an enormous infrastructure to make it possible for such a plan to work. Lasinka, what do you say to that?
Indeed, Koistra, who first developed the plan, saw clearly at the outset that if the plan were implemented partially, the growing chasm between the haves and the have-nots would grow ever greater. He stressed the need for it to be implemented globally and suggested that the UN be the agency to do so, as it's the most universal global agency that we have. The UN has a huge experience in setting up and working with large global infrastructure. Take some of the UN associated agencies like the Universal Postal Union, the International Telecommunications Union, the International Civil Aviation, and the maritime organizations. Then there are those who work with people at the group and local levels. For instance, the UN Development Programme with offices in 133 developing countries. There are other agencies like the Food and Agricultural Organization and the International Labour Organization, UNESCO. All these work with training of individuals at the local levels. Administrative agency for the CEFA plan would consist of the following sections. First, one for the global economic experts to determine each year by how much extra the global economy would grow through the CEFA plan. These would decide how it would be apportioned between the fund to stabilize the currency and the administration of the plan, and between all people of the world. Secondly, a department for the development workers to support people at the local levels to implement the plan and to promote the group decision-making processes from the local right up until the global levels. Thirdly, there would be a bank that would make sure that all people have an account, that their individual income is deposited there and is credited and debited as producers for their requests are found. The bank would also have exchange facilities to make it possible for CEFAs to be exchanged for local currencies, so that those being paid in CEFAs, the development and other workers for the plan, and also the producers, would be able to exchange their income for national currencies. The CEFA agency would also have a section that would find producers as close to the locale of each person as possible to supply the goods and services being requested for their basic income.
This is an interesting idea. Where did this idea originate? And have any economists or others commented on it?
The plan was conceived by Dutchman Peter Koistra. Koistra was a social activist, an innovator, a visionary, and an artist. He actually set up an art lending system throughout the whole Benelux countries. He would tell us how he was watching one of the many ads on Dutch TV showing graphic images of our world's most starving children and asking for money. He describes how he suddenly had this vision showing how this never-ending problem could be ended once and for all. He described and worked out this vision in a book titled For, meaning for all people and nature. And this book was sponsored by the Dutch government. Later, it was endorsed by a large range of experts, including Jan Tinbergen, who was awarded the very first Nobel Prize in economics for having developed and applied dynamic models for the analysis of economic processes. Tinbergen said he had applied his analysis model to the work of Koistra and found they both came to similar conclusions. That was his endorsement of the plan. I had Koistra's approach to financing assessed by experts in development funding in the United Nations Secretariat. I was told that the approach to financing proposed by Koistra was based on very simple, fundamental economic principles, and that some aspects of the plan were reminiscent of the special drawing rights which are now used. The question how the plan might begin even before the electronic aspects were in place was directed at the UN's Population Commission, and they pointed out that they were charged with gathering global statistics on various aspects of the world's population and could very easily add a section to their questionnaire dealing with the CEPA plan.
We've heard a lot about a pretty radical plan, but one that has the potential to dramatically reduce global poverty and potentially eliminate extreme poverty while contributing to the achievement of most of the other SDGs. Lysinka, could you please summarize what we've heard today?
UN Secretary General has warned that we're badly off track in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. At the same time, all people's lives and livelihoods are being affected by climate change, droughts, floods, biodiversity loss, and a scrambling for resources that leads to violence and wars. The UN conferences held throughout the year, including the high-level political forum, put pressure on all governments as well as people via the media to take effective action. The CEPA plan increases global awareness and action as follows. It opens a global electronic marketplace for the trade exclusively in sustainable products, and it brings every woman, man and child on board, as well as businesses worldwide, who are invited to provide sustainable goods and services for this new marketplace. Businesses are increasingly anxious to avoid being seen to be a part of the problem, and this is reflected in their advertising, stressing sustainability. In addition, this provides all, including those who would provide for the marketplace, an opportunity to participate in local to global discussions in which all people are encouraged to participate to decide which goods and services can be part of this new sustainable development economy. Besides encouraging all to be part of the movement to sustainability, the supplementary global economy can gradually take over more and more from the present ones as people see the need for sustainability and businesses are ready.
Thank you, Lysinka. Yvonne, we've not yet heard from you. Where might this idea go from here?
Thanks, Bill. The supplementary income for all concept is not a new one. Presently, there are many variations being explored and tested globally at the local government level, by private foundations, self-run organizations, where those interested can opt in to participate. And the topic is being discussed at universities as well. The CEPA plan is focused on accelerating the SDGs and the 2030 goals. The more people know about the supplementary income concept and its potential impact, the more opportunity there is to develop well thought out programs. A global plan of this scope is constantly evolving and requires participation from a diverse pool of people, which is why we invite you to visit our website at supplementaryincomforall.org and encourage you to complete the short form. Among other things, your participation will place you on our mailing list, which provides regular opportunities to give your input and to participate in doing outreach at the UN with like-minded organizations. Your unique background and way of thinking could be that link that turns this idea into a viable reality. The plan relies heavily on participation from experts in the fields of economy, sociology, sustainability, and other environmental practices. People with these skill sets will ensure the best possible execution of the plan. We are eager to deepen and broaden the plan in light of today's realities. We hope you will engage with us. Your individual comments and suggestions will be most helpful in executing this important initiative. The website address is again, supplementaryincomforall.org. Thank you for your time and consideration. Back to you, Bill.
Thank you, Yvonne. Well, audience, now it's your turn. We have some time remaining, and the panel is prepared to answer as many questions as possible. Please post any comments or questions in the chat, beginning with your name and organization, and the panel will answer as many questions as we have time for. Okay, so the next stage here is really to find out what questions you might have. So please enter into the chat your name, organization, and what your question is, and yeah, basically that's it. What your question is here, and our chief panelist here, Lasinka, is available to try to answer those questions. So I'd like to start off. And let me just go and take a look and see in the chat. By the way, here for all of you, if everyone could just go. If every one of you could just go in the chat and just put in your name and contact information, name, organization, and contact information. That way there, we're going to be uploading the video to YouTube, and we're going to be able to then pass on the link to you. So let me just see here on the questions that we have. Richard Jordan from the International Council for Caring Communities is asking how the bank would be established. Lasinka, do you want to answer that, please? You're muted, Lasinka.
Thank you, Richard, for that question. The process that we would have to go through and will have to go through, and many of you here are associated with the United Nations, is that we would have to introduce it at the United Nations, and the United Nations would have to take it on board. I'll quickly go into the process that it takes. Normally, we who are associated with the UN have access to the various governments, and we can bring the plan to them. And when enough governments want to introduce a plan, they take it to the General Assembly and they have it voted on. And usually the General Assembly will go through various stages. The first one will be that they suggest that the Secretary General makes a report on the plan and how it would work. And then they would have an open working group to discuss how the plan could be implemented and in how far governments really want it. And then it would once again be adopted by the General Assembly. Now, so the plan would then be adopted by the UN, and it would be adopted by the UN, meaning, and it's usually adopted by consensus, that the 193 members of the United Nations want to be a part of the plan. They want to benefit from the plan. They want to have their people have the basic income. They want to benefit from the CIFAs that are created by the plan. And so conceivably, every country will be connecting their central bank to the plan and to the bank, which would be the bank of the administrative agency of the CIFA plan. So countries would voluntarily connect their banks to the plan, and as members of their community provide services and goods and services to be sold on the electronic network, they would then make it possible for the people from their country to transfer the CIFAs into their national currency so that they can spend it in their own country. So that would mean that countries would also have the CIFAs, and the CIFAs would then be currency which would be used within the countries also for sustainable goods and services. The advantage to a country to have CIFAs is that the CIFAs are a hard currency. Everything is done in the plan to make sure that the backing is a solid one of marketable goods and services, and so that the value of the CIFA doesn't fluctuate. And that means that the CIFAs in a country would take the role of gold, or the dollar was often used as a sort of a hard currency. And so that is the way in which the banks of the countries would be associated, because the countries would see it in their interest to be associated economically with the CIFA plan.
Lasinka, I think here in the presentation, you pointed out that when this was looked at by the Secretariat, the UN Secretariat here some years back, they pointed out the similarities to the way IMF works with special drawing rights. Do you maybe want to add a little bit about that?
Well, to be quite honestly, I don't have it in my mind right now, Bill. I'm sorry. It was in my book, and I did write it down, but at this moment, it's not really in the forefront of my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay. Basically, here, my understanding of that is that the special drawing rights are basically reserved deposits that all countries make to back up the ability for the IMF to step in and help if any individual banks have a problem, get into a situation that they can influence the flow or the quantity of currency to keep economies going around the world. Okay, any other questions, please? Perhaps regarding here the electronic marketplace and how people in various parts of the world might be able to interact with the electronic marketplace, about why corporations or why the big producers will increasingly be focusing on sustainable products and services, and therefore helping grow or the transference, if you would, of the world economy into a more sustainable economy.
Bill, if I may, I would have a question.
Sure.
About, Lysinka talked about the implementation via the UN, but in our discussions until now, we also envisaged the possibility of trickling up from the bottom up an implementation that it would be a more gradual and slow implementation, not coming straight from the UN. Do you think that is a possibility?
Lysinka?
Or any?
Thank you, Alice, so much for bringing that up. Absolutely, because the plan is going to involve people worldwide, every man, woman, and child. And the more they know about it, the better. At the same time, there are so many organizations, and you are also closely linked with the UN and have been for many, many years, I might say even decades. And so we know how many organizations there are, only those even associated with the United Nations that have the same goals, and that in fact are implementing an aspect of the plan already. I'm thinking of organizations like the Global Economic Eco-Village Network. I'm thinking about the Basic Income organization. I'm thinking about, there are just so very many. In fact, almost all of the organizations associated with the United Nations Economic and Social Council are actually implementing aspects of sustainable development which are completely relevant to the plan. So the point is that since so many of us are doing the same thing, it would be very, very much an important step for all of us to take to learn about one another. So if you are one of those organizations, please let us know who you are. Let's work together. Let's endorse each other's work. Let's support each other's work. And together we will then, from the bottom up, be creating the whole atmosphere and the knowledge necessary for the plan to really take root. And the faster and the more we do that, the more we can help each other, the faster the whole process of sustainable development will come about.
Let's think if I could add a follow-on question to that, because you've just made me curious as well. When we are looking at the option of bottom up from the grassroots, that raises the question, where in that case would the $500 come from? Where would the supplementary income come from if this is going bottom up from individual communities?
Bill, I think that already there are many individual communities that have local currencies. Mm-hmm. And I've forgotten how many there are, but there are really literally hundreds. And in fact, Australia sort of uses these local currencies very officially. So there are already a lot of communities which are sort of carrying out a sort of an economy at the local level already. So this would be one way in which communities would be doing that. I think that the actual creation of the plan would have to eventually be global. The problem is that the plan helps those people who are involved in the plan to make their lives economically a greater success and more rewarding, and to make their livelihoods and their well-being greater. So if there's just a part of the world that is connected to the plan, then we begin to get a big chasm, a greater chasm again, between those people that have and that are developing and finding well-being in their lives, and those people who are excluded. And that is why Koester felt it would actually have to be implemented globally. And of course, those of us who are associated with the United Nations, we have quite an outreach within the UN. And we, first of all, we have mailing lists that go to all of the ambassadors, to heads of state, etc. But we also have connections with all of the missions or the embassies of the countries to the UN. Yvonne, you and I have often also visited these embassies and spoken to the ambassadors to the United Nations about projects. So that is one way in which we could actually go about being in contact. Since so many of us are working in the same direction, and since we all have different types of facilities and strengths, like for instance our outreach in the UN, it would be extremely to the advantage of all of us to work together. And that would be a hugely strong movement, and it would support individual organizations now also to bring their projects into the UN, into the consciousness of the greater community, because those of us who are connected to the UN are also parts of mailing lists that connect us to other organizations. So the things that we do are spread around fellow organizations, but also spread around to the member states of the UN. So working together has advantages for us all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. You mentioned earlier about the creation of currency and how this works. I think I'd mentioned I had some contacts with some people from the Federal Reserve and with banks in other parts of the world looking at the future of currency and money and so forth. And I can one of the key things you mentioned here is the role of central banks in determining and keeping a balance between the amount of currency in the economy and the amounts of goods and services. Because if the amounts of currency goes up, but the amount of goods and services don't, that is going to result in more money chasing each product and service, and that's going to that's going to result in inflation. On the other hand, if we see that the amounts of goods and services are going up, the amount of currency, if it's not going up, that's going to result in deflation, because there's just not that much currency around to be able to pay for all those products at whatever the going rate had been before. So that requires the banks to look to say, hey, we have to increase the quantity of currency to maintain that balance. And I think that's what you're referring to when you're saying here that, hey, if we have a whole bunch of people who currently are not participating in the markets because they just don't have the means, now if they have the means all of a sudden, this is additional demand above and beyond whatever was there previously. That is going to result in the production and distribution of more goods and services than otherwise would have been the case. And that's what justifies the central banks or the agency, the CIFA agency, to increase that amount of currency out there to keep that balance between the goods and services being produced and the amount of currency in the marketplace. And in a way, you could say it's almost self-funding, the model that Koistra presented. Is that a correct assessment?
That is indeed a correct assessment, Bill. And I think I mentioned how much care is taken to make sure that the amounts of goods and services and the amounts of currency are in balance. When amount of currency is not used, let's say somebody doesn't use their basic income or their supplementary income, it just disappears. So only those goods and services that are actually bought and sold within the system, that amount of money is made. But you're quite right, because what happens, because people will be exchanging their CIFAs, the producers will be exchanging their CIFAs, the development workers who are helping the program, the people to participate in the program will be paid in CIFAs, and they will be able to translate that into national currency. And there is indeed a danger of inflation taking place within countries because they suddenly get extra currency. And that is the reason why Koistra said when the amount of money is generated, first of all, they create this big fund, which will be to adjust any miscalculations, but also to help with inflation and deflation in other countries as well.
And you mentioned the Koistra pointing out the need to go globally, because if we take a look, the world is pretty much divided into wealthy countries and poor countries. There's not a whole lot in the middle. And for poor countries to try to do this on their own, the question is, do they have the means to be able to do that? And do they even have the goods and services being produced in their country or in a particular region? So I think a little bit here is the idea that being able to provide that such an income has to look at what is happening with the growth in products and services on a global scale, because we don't live in local environments. We're today, pretty much everything is living in a global scale. So that extra demand that's being created somewhere, that is being fulfilled somewhere else, that has to somehow flow back to support the funds that went to that poorer country to enable them to be able to create that demand in the first place. Is that a little bit what his thinking was about the need to avoid exacerbating the wealth polarization that might otherwise happen if this is only done in wealthy countries or only done in poorer countries?
Yeah, absolutely, Bill. This plan has, of course, been discussed by many people. And there was also the thought, well, why don't we just try it with a coalition of the willing? So some of the richer countries working with some of the poorer countries who want to be a part of it, and just see how the plan works, a sort of a pilot project. That would be, of course, conceivable to do it that way, but it would absolutely be detrimental to have that for any length of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now the Commons Cluster, the Commons Cluster is really about reinforcing the idea that there are certain things in this world, such as the oceans and the air and other things that don't belong to any one country or any one group of people. They belong to the earth in common. To all members of residents of the planet in common, if you would. And we have examples where we see individual governmental regions who have said, okay, here is land that is held in common. So if any benefit should come from the use of that land, that should benefit everybody. And they're using that to provide what they are calling a universal basic income. But I think it's basically the same idea. I'm thinking in particular of Alaska, which is taking the rights for oil exploration and the like on government lands, and whatever benefits or revenues come in from those fees and whatnot are distributed equally among every man, woman, and child in Alaska. So I know here that maybe the idea of the common good, if you would, was not necessarily part of Koistra's thinking back in his time, but can you see here this idea of taking this idea that the earth, there are certain things we all own in common, we all share the ownership in, and taking the exploitation of those parts of our environment to be able to fund and benefit a program like this, which in turn would reduce poverty and all the other ills that originate with poverty and the inability of people to participate in economies, but also, as your program in general is doing, is getting people to be aware, hey, wait a minute, but if we're going to take the fruits of the exploitation of our common good, we want to make sure that we don't have that benefit be used to further destroy that environment. So the encouragement then to say, okay, let's take the fruits of our common spaces and let's provide that to everybody, but let's make sure that those people at the same time use those funds only for things that are harmful to neither planet nor people.
Yeah, actually, Yvonne, you actually mentioned that these ideas are not really new, they're really going on. I'm thinking in that context, Bill, also of the Norwegian pension fund. Norway has a tremendous amount of oil reserves. And so they have said, well, this belongs to the whole Norwegian population. And so the exploitation of those oil fields are done with input from the whole Norwegian population, and they all benefit from it because they go to a pension fund, which are then given to their children and the people who are working. The population, I understand, is extremely serious about this, so that the companies that are allowed to exploit the Norwegian oil fields are looked upon for in how far are they sustainable, how do they work with the environment. So that is another example. Internationally, there are also examples. There are sort of areas which are considered with belonging to the whole of humanity. Antarctica, for instance. This is being, I believe it's being administered by 6 nations, but for the benefit and also for the intellectual benefit of the whole of humanity. Outer space is also an area. The seabed, beyond the areas of national jurisdiction, is also, there's a whole treaty about the seabed. So these are indeed areas which are being exploited for the well-being of all people. There are other theories as well. I think Alana Hartzog has some really interesting theories in this particular area as well. So that is indeed a theory of exploiting the common areas of our world for the benefit of all. Unfortunately, in this period, we have exploited our earth so very, very badly that the question arises, can we afford to actually exploit national resources to give people all worldwide an income? And I think that many people would say, absolutely not. We absolutely have to work with our environment within the constraints of the environment. We have to live in harmony with the natural environment. We cannot afford to deplete it anymore, to pollute it anymore. We have at the moment, I think, as I think one of our friends says, in global overshoot, the World Footprint Network, and I don't have the right, this is not the right title, but there is a global footprint network worldwide that counts how much each person and how much each country can and may use of the world's resources without going into debt. And the date when we have used the amount we're allowed to use per year, according to the Global Footprint Network, is becoming earlier and earlier and earlier. That means that the amount of time that we are in overshoot, are depleting our earth even more, is increasing every year. And this is suicidal. This is a problem that is being aggravated all the time. And therefore, it is incredibly important that we really understand which goods and services can we still rely on. And obviously, there will be physical things that we have to get from the environment, some basic foods, etc. But what we take from the material environment has to be minimal. And the types of goods and services that we can trade ad infinitum, is education. That doesn't put us in global overshoot. Creative endeavors, artistic endeavors, sporting endeavors generally are things that we can, ways in which human beings can develop themselves and their potential. Those are ways in which we can build the economy. But we have to be extremely careful about what we take from the natural environment.
Yeah. You mentioned here earlier, and I'm looking here to see if any new questions come up. But you mentioned earlier that as we're providing new demand because we're making giving people who currently do not have an opportunity to participate in the economy and therefore have no demand. They have need, but demand is need plus the ability to pay. So we're creating demand, if you would. And you pointed out that this in time is going to encourage more and more producers when they see, oh, there's more demand, but the demand is for sustainable products and services. This is going to encourage more and more producers to focus more and more on sustainable products and services. We see that to a degree happening already, but we have to look and see that the economy consists of producers and it consists of distributors. And in terms of number of people employed and so forth, very often the distributor process is bigger than the production process. And I'm just wondering here, in the same way that producers, that manufacturers might say, oh, you know what, let's design more sustainable products and services. Let's go and focus more on those kinds of products. The people who are in the distribution networks today, if they are seeing that more and more of the market is looking to buy for sustainable products and services, don't you expect here that more of the distribution resources or distribution assets in the world are also going to change their focus to be more focused on sustainable products and services? I'm talking about everything from Alibaba to Amazon to Home Shopping Network and you name it, that as these become more and more focused and maybe even some of them might say we're going to be exclusive for sustainable products and services. What does that mean for, you're calling for an electronic marketplace. Well, there's existing large-scale electronic marketplaces, and if they are also focused solely on products that are sustainable, which would be good, I would assume you would love to see that from the perspective of what that would mean for the world. But what would that mean for the SEFA marketplace?
I think that that process will actually happen, Bill. Firstly, when it comes to distribution, the Koistra network will be looking at providing goods and services for people who want them from their basic income that are very close by, so that they can build up the local economies. So if somebody can buy a bicycle, which is within 50 miles or so, of where they are, that will be chosen. So that would be one of the tasks that the SEFA network will take upon themselves, to have minimal division in distance between the demand and the supply. So that is one other thing. At the same time, exactly what you say is the objective of the SEFA plan, that as the SEFA plan gains steam, as people recognize the importance, the imperative of having sustainable goods and services, that businesses will gradually, as they're ready, without conflict, without layoffs, begin to become more and more sustainable. And so they will also be providing sustainable goods and services, and they can supply it for the SEFA plan. Mm-hmm. Anybody can become a producer, for the SEFA plan.
One of the biggest challenges that we see in local economies, and if we can see that especially in developed countries, as you go around, you see more and more of the outlets, the retail outlets, are parts of large chains, the more and more of the manufacturing. It's about a thing called economies of scale. And it is very, very difficult for companies to, or anybody that's involved in economies to avoid economies of scale, except for the most simple manual labors. And even there, we see here that plumbers, electricians, handymen are starting to become part of global networks. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a corporation. If we think of the Spar supermarket chain in Europe, those are all independently owned, but what they do is they collaborate on those functions where they can take advantage of economies of scale to be able to provide goods and services at lower cost to those who are seeking and needing those goods and services. So I wonder to what degree, because we can see here that there's always been a consolidation when somebody goes and starts some businesses or whatnot in a certain field, that starts bringing people with that knowledge and know-how about that field together, and that critical mass results in more people wanting to invest in that field or invest in the education related to that field being consolidated. So we saw that in the early days of computing, we had Route 128 around Boston. That seemed to be the hub of where everybody in that technology area was going. Now it's Silicon Valley. It migrated out to Silicon Valley. Insurance industry, that was all based around Hartford, Connecticut. I'm talking about here in the US. But I think we can see worldwide that pharmaceuticals, New Jersey, but now Nigeria. Nigeria is developing into a sort of an R&D hub for pharmaceuticals, not just for Africa, but for the world. And I'm wondering how, because the effort to try to go and say, okay, how do I find that local bicycle? But what if that local bicycle costs twice as much as the bicycle that's made halfway around the world, because simply all the resources, the machines, everything there, they can leverage that economy of scale to provide the bicycles. And if at the end of the day, we want to give people transportation that's not going to pollute the world, Mike, is a good opportunity for that. I'm just curious as to whether that is realistic to think that for a lot of the goods and services that people might be looking for are not going to be competitive on a local basis.
Bill, you're quite right. There's going to be the global economy and how that works, or let's say the global economies and how they work, because that's really what you're talking about. Koistra did point out that the United Nations would be the agency that would actually look at where can we find the goods and services, and they would be the largest purchaser. Because of this network, they would be a very, very large purchaser of products, so that they would be able to get them at a fairly reasonable price. They, as I mentioned before, they will try to arrange for the sale within as close as possible to keep money within the community. So that the UN certainly would be participating in that process, because they would be a hugely large purchaser of sustainable goods and services, and would have all the advantages that these other groups like the SPA, etc. have. But there will be the parallel processes going on.
Okay, good. Let me just see. There's also a question here about in the early days, as we're getting started here, there in winning supporters, if you would. There's always the challenge of languages. So as we take a look, Richard raised the question here about what the large percent that is francophone in both ECOSOC at the UN, but also just taking a look, if you're trying to deal in Africa, there's a major part of Africa that you really have to use French if you want to be able to be understood. Or if you go into Latin America, it's very important that you're dealing with Portuguese, Brazilian, or Spanish to be able to communicate. So what is the plan to take the CIFA information and make this available now in multiple languages?
I'm going to talk off the bat, Richard. It's nice having you here. At the United Nations, as Richard, you know very well, there are 6 official languages. They're Chinese, there's English, there's Spanish, there's Arabic, there's French, and there's Spanish. Those are the 5 official languages. And officially, the UN produces everything in those 6 languages, but there are 2 working languages. One of them is English and one is French. So the United Nations is confronted with this problem all the time. So whenever we go into a UN conference, we have earphones on and we choose the language that we want. And sometime we will be listening directly to the speaker, and another time we'll be listening to the interpretation of what the speaker says. The UN has an amazing division of interpreters and also translators, but also interpreters. They're absolutely brilliant. The United Nations is confronted with the fact that so many member nations have different languages, but also within the country. I think India has something like 150 different languages. And so we are definitely, Richard, that is a huge problem in our world. And we don't want to sort of say, well, this language doesn't count, etc. So I think the United Nations has ways in which it has its local people, but the local people are in touch with people who can interpret at that level. Richard, do you know how it's dealt with? Do you have any other ideas about that? Let's say by the United Nations Development Program, because they are in all of the developing countries. And so they are constantly faced with that. Hi, there you are. I can see you,
Hi.
Richard.
Yeah, well, in New York, the interpreters are, it's a union shop, it's union labor. So you can't have the interpreters run on and on and on. They'll give you 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes extra, but not everyone is going to be able to use UN interpretation. You also have Portuguese. There's Portuguese, there's German. I believe these are, if I'm correct, paid for by countries so that at least some documentation is available in those languages. But if you go to Mali and you're in a village, will the res rep ask someone to go along with you and interpret to a small village what the CIFA plan is about? I think the interpretation is something that really needs to be thought about with a lot of care. And I also, I'm not going to name organizations, but there are organizations in ECOSOC, I believe, that would raise a lot of eyebrows in the United States if we said, oh, let's work with you. Lysinka, trust me, there are some stumbling blocks in the way. I would not want to necessarily associate with every organization, and every organization might not want to associate with us. It's just a word of warning, and I will not mention the organizations, but I have to bill privately. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Yes, listen.
Yeah, Richard, yeah, there are stumbling blocks. And I think that all of us, when we start to think about global projects, are terribly aware of those stumbling blocks. And personally, I've been thinking about how there will be development workers who will be working in all of the communities, and each community will be asked to supply 2 development workers who will be trained at the global or by the UN. And I can see how the UN would work, but especially with today, when you have the ability to work online and to give classes online. I think Harvard professors give classes to something like 100,000 people at the same time. I could see that the United Nations would train a certain amount of people at the global level as development workers, and that these people would then take their knowledge into their own country and train development workers in their own languages of that country. And then those development workers can go to the various local levels. So I see that the language can be, the language stumbling block can today be dealt with in ways that we didn't have in the past.
I think also we have to keep in mind the translation tools have improved tremendously.
Yes.
In the last year. So right now, they're on our website, on the Supplementary Income for All website. I think we have more than 40 languages available on the website there. The current translation tools, are they dealing with, let's say, every one of the 25 or 27 languages in Uganda? I doubt it. But they're of the world languages, a significant percent. You know, there's more than 1,000 languages out there probably in the world in total. But there's probably somewhere around 150, 160 languages that are pretty accurate. Obviously, the more materials that the self-learning, the learning process of the machine learning can take advantage of to understand the translation, the more accurate it is. So the more a language is spoken by the more people, the more accurate the translations have become in those languages. But for sure, all the UN languages are covered. It's just in a year here talking to friends who converse in Chinese, German, and Spanish, that you basically cannot say this was translated by somebody who was not a native speaker on that. So I think, and I couldn't have said that 2 years ago. So if we look here, programs like this, they're not going to be implemented overnight. This is going to take a while. It's probably going to be several years. We look where, the global goals are aiming at 2030. If we could say that a program like this was available worldwide in 2030, I think we'd all be saying, wow, that's great success. So by then, I think the language issue is probably not going to be of a major concern. However, when we are talking about that local village out there, the odds are the people that are going to be the guides or the counselors, they are probably going to speak one of the major languages, but also know that local language. They have to know some of the languages out there, they're only spoken by a couple of hundred people. It's not like, that we're talking about languages here that involve hundreds of thousands of people. Okay, any final questions or comments by anyone? Lasinka, you can raise your own questions and comments too.
Well, is there somebody here getting ready to say something? I see some changes in one of the participants.
I think that's a new visitor here.
Okay. Well, all I want to say is I want to thank the enormous amount of work that went into this by so many people in producing the video. Bill, you were absolutely amazing there. Alice, you played a huge role in taking care of the technicalities and the relationship with the UN. The speakers put an enormous amount of effort into that, into putting their part in the video. And Saima Huck was an amazing editor. And Bill, you put it all together. You conceived of it and you put it together, and you're absolutely brilliant. Richard and everybody else who's been here, many thanks for being here and for inspiring us to talk, etc. And thanks to everybody. I hope we can all continue on again, and we'll stay in touch and work on this together to make it a reality. With people like you on board, Bill and others, it's going to become a reality. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'd just like to add to that my thanks to everyone, especially to the panelists that put so much effort and put up with all my prodding and little picky details there and putting the video together and other items. As many people have mentioned here, there's no one answer, and it's got to be like that. Otherwise, nothing happens. The basic ideas here, we have to come to grips with what are we going to do about the wealth polarization of the world, the inequalities that are just getting worse and worse. And we have to realize that where there's no demand, there's no opportunity. And as a result here, this is what leads people like the former ambassador from the African Union to point out there's more doctors practicing in Los Angeles County than in Nigeria, more doctors practicing in New York than in Ghana, simply because you can't just go and bootstrap yourself and say, I'm going to get a great education. I'm located here or there in the world. If the people around you do not have the means to be able to afford your services, there's no value in you getting yourself in a position to provide those services. And that's what leads to the brain drains, because you aspire to improve yourself, and then all of a sudden you're going and saying, well, they can't afford me here, I need to go where people can afford me. And that deprives those countries of the resources and the skills that it would benefit that country in growing. And at the same time here, it takes people that do have resources and skills and means out of those countries, which further deplete their ability to earn. So we see so many countries, all they do is sell their natural resources because they have not developed the human capital. But there has to be, to develop that human capital, there has to be demand. And what the CIFA program does is it helps create that demand among those who currently do not provide any demand. And that could be the stimulus, the accelerator that is going to enable those countries to grow and close the inequality gaps. And that is going to relieve pressures that, the U.S., one asks, why did the U.S. do the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II? Well, a big chunk is they said, you know what, if those people get to be more successful and wealthier, they're going to buy more stuff from us. They're going to be our customers. So it's in the self-interest of the wealthy parts of the world that see that the rest of the world gets developed so that they can become their customers. And it's a two-way street, because that also enables those people in those wealthy countries to be able to buy products and services. We see that already in things like fruits and vegetables that very often are coming from poorer countries, but that have the land out there. So the CIFA program can be a key to really kicking off that ability to impact the inequalities. And we have to realize countries where the median per capita household or per household income is 1/20th of that of developed countries. Do we think they're going to be concerned that much about climate change? They're looking to see, what am I going to eat next week? So again, if we want those parties to be working with us to solve those global issues that we're all confronted with, we need to make sure they have the means to be able to do so. So anyway, thank you so much, Lysinka. Thank you for keeping the vision here and keeping driving on that. Thank you to all the panelists that participated. Thank you to everybody who attended here and gave us your questions or were attentive to the discussion here. And if there's no other comments or questions, yes, Lysinka.
I want to just add, thank you very much, Bill. Not everybody is in a position to give their email address for various reasons. And I was wondering, is there any way, and also, or to be, there are all sorts of reasons why people cannot be actually connected, also via email with us. Is there any way now of seeing that the link to the YouTube is made available so that anybody can see it in the chat now and
yes.
keep it there so people can make that, get it before we break it off?
Unfortunately, we can't do that at this stage because the YouTube address is going to change, because we just the final version of the video was just rendered during the session here. But I encourage everyone, go to our website. That's supplementaryincomefforall.org. If you want, go to the contact there. To contact us, you don't necessarily, you could just put in your comments, your questions. But we will have on that website, we will put the link to this video on the website there, so that anybody who wants can just go there and look without having to register for anything.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I thereby declare we're 2 minutes over, so I declare this side event to be closed. Thank you.
Thank you.